Growing up, I never really felt like I fit in. I was always taller, skinnier, and more awkward than anyone else that I knew. One day I saw an interview with a woman by the name of Tyra Banks who shared that she too didn't feel like she fit in at home or at school. But now as a successful model, she's found her place in the world. And I thought, well, that's it. All I have to do is become a supermodel and all my problems are going to be solved. So at the age of 13, I set out to all of the top agencies in New York City. And on that day, they told me that I was too tall, too short, too urban, too everything but what it was that they were looking for in a model. I remember leaving and feeling desperate to be seen. I didn't fit in at home, at school, and not even as a fashion model. So I wrote a letter to Tyra detailing how I'd been feeling and the feedback that I received from agencies. She responded sometime later, and in her response, she shared that I should appreciate the journeys, both the wins and the losses. Embrace your failures, because they'll help you appreciate the success so much more later on. I still apply that advice to my life to this day. I was away at school when I turned 18 and Tyra announced the Cycle 9 auditions for America's Next Top Model. I remember arriving at the venue and seeing blocks and blocks and blocks of the most beautiful women that I've ever seen. Black, white, Latina, Asian, and everything in between. For the first time in my life, I was able to acknowledge another woman's beauty without associating them with my flaws. That moment taught me that when you're walking in your purpose, you'll feel a sense of peace because you're right where you're supposed to be. I finally got in the audition room and they lined us up chest to back, chest to back, chest to back. And my big moment came down to Bianca Golden, 5'11", 18 years old, Queens, New York. That was it. That was my moment. I was stuck on my thoughts in my head thinking that can't be it. I need to tell them how I feel about fitting in. I want to tell them about my letter to Tyra. I want to tell them the advice that she offered me. I want to tell them that for the first time in my life, I feel like I belong. I was so caught on my own thoughts that I almost missed them calling my name. They called my name. I was the only woman chosen out of all of those women wrapped around the blocks to make it on America's Next Top Model, Cycle 9. I always get chills when I tell that part of the story because there's so many moments in our lives where we're focused on who's in front of us and who's behind us in line that we forget what's for us is for us. You can't take it. You can't touch it. You don't even know it's there because it's mine. So I went on national television as my most authentic self. A Black girl of West Indian descent from Queens, New York. I was unapologetically myself, which made for great television, but it was probably also why I didn't win. Now, I don't want to go ahead and spoil this for anyone, but I finished third runner-up and I was crushed. I was scared that everyone would see me as a loser. Isn't it funny that we can accomplish so much and still get caught on the one thing that we didn't do? I overcame my insecurities. I was one of 11 women chosen out of millions to compete. I was even one of the faces of the Olympics. But that wasn't enough. I couldn't help but focus on the one thing that I couldn't do. I went home devastated. I cried and I hid from the reaction of the world. And then one day I received a call connecting me to Tyra, and I just knew that she was calling to tell me that there was a mistake and I was the real winner. That's not exactly what happened. She was just calling to tell me that there was an agency interested in signing me, and all I had to do was show up. Now, as a product of my environment, I know how not only to show up, but to show out. So I went and got the Jamaica Avenue special, and for those of you who are not from Queens, New York, that is a long weave, a nice set of acrylic nails, paired with some thick, long lashes. I showed up to Click Model Management that day ready to reclaim my time and get signed. That's not exactly what happened. When the president of the agency came out, I heard her whisper to the receptionist, well, I thought you said she was here. To which I jumped up and said, hello, how are you? I introduced myself. She stopped, turned her head, and squinted. She then ushered me to the back, but I didn't think anything of it. Maybe this is just how bougie people say hello. When we got to the back, she explained that she was a bit taken back because on the show, I had a low haircut, to which I explained, yeah, I got a weave. She looked and said, okay, well, can you go to the bathroom and take it off? My hair? It was at that moment that I realized I was going to have to explain exactly what a weave was. But before I could, she reached over and grabbed my hand. I wiggled my finger so she could see my nails better. She said, well, can you take these off? And I thought, well, yeah, but not at this very moment. Finally, she grabbed me by my chin and said, certainly, darling, you weren't born with those lashes. But before she could even ask, I said, well, listen, these can't come off. She thanked me for my time and told me we'll be in touch. As I packed up my portfolio, I began feeling uneasy. I walked towards the door, but I quickly turned around and asked, well, do you need my telephone number? She said, no, darling, it is on file. I took a few more steps before I turned back and said, well, what about my email address? She said, no, darling, we'll be in touch. I got all the way to the door. I put my hand on the knob, and before I could turn it, I turned around and said, sometimes I ride the train and my service is a little shaky, but let me give you my mother's number because she will always get the message to me. She gently reminded me that when the time is right, we will be in touch. I made it outside before I started crying. But I couldn't sit in that moment. You see, there was an opportunity waiting for me, and I couldn't afford to lose it. So I went to the closest barbershop. I sat down, and I demanded for him to cut it all off. As the barber started cutting my hair, I plicked off my nails, and I ripped off my lashes. I think I left the men in that barbershop scared and scarred that day. When I got out of there, I immediately called the agent, and she said, Bianca, I told you we'll be in touch. And I said, I know. But I just wanted to let you know my hair's cut off, those nails that you didn't like plucked, lashes gone. She said, well, why would you do that? I was unemployed and bald. I was a failure. I had failed to get an agency, so I took an alternative route. I got on the show and failed to win. I had an agency interested in signing me. All I had to do was show up. I failed to show up the right way. By all accounts in my mind, I was the failure. I was no longer afraid to fail because that would mean I was afraid of myself. I was a big fail. Rejection was no longer a concern because at that point, I heard no so much it became a part of my love language. The only fear I had left was that I'd lose my will to try. So at the age of 18, I set out to all of the top agencies in New York City. And on that day, I heard that I was too tall, too short, too urban, too everything but what it was that they were looking for in a model. I was emotionally and physically drained when I got to the last casting call. Now, every casting call is different. At major model management, they require you to walk around the shared office table with the agent sitting on either side and introduce yourself. State your name, your stats, and walk around the table, then exit. I noticed that none of the agents looked up as the models completed their casting process. So I started looking around, and I would notice that the hope in their eyes would leave as they would exit. My sadness turned to anger, and by the time it was my turn, I went in and out with a bang. Good morning, everyone. How are you? My name is Bianca. Well, not that anyone cares, but if you wouldn't mind, I'm just asking for 5 seconds of your time. You see, we just want to make sure that we're good enough. Could you tell us? I'm going to walk around this table, not because you care, but I'm just going to help you with some practice of ignoring me effectively. All right, here I go. If you don't mind, excuse me. All right, guys, I'm done. I know you're happy. I certainly am. Have a good day. God bless. When I was done, I sat down to take off my heels and put my Jordans on, but I felt someone tap me on my shoulder. I knew it was security there to kick me out. I didn't even look up. I said, don't worry, I don't need an escort. I'm good. The voice connected to the tap said, actually, we don't want you to leave. We'd like to sign you. When I looked up, it was one of the agents. I just started to cry. And then I started laughing at myself because that's important too. Finally, I was a model. My childhood dream had become a reality. I did things that only people would dream about. From the outside looking in, I had made it. But I wasn't happy. I missed so much of life because I was never around. birthdays, holidays, graduations, anniversaries, the things we take for granted. People stopped inviting me to things because they knew I wasn't going to make it. And so one day I called my agent and I quit. I couldn't do it anymore. I was maybe 24, 25, unemployed and lost. So I did what all Black people do when they need guidance. I went to church. I needed God to speak to me, but he was silent. I couldn't wait around and do nothing because I'm a doer. So I began to do. I started a ministry for girls ages 13 to 18 called She Can, which stood for Sisterhood Empowerment Can Change a Nation. I loved every moment of it. I couldn't wait for them to get out of school so we could meet, have discussion, make connections between life and various topics, build relationships. When I was with them, I felt the same sense of peace that I had when I was auditioning for America's Next Top Model. And though I was unemployed, I was fulfilled. I was happy. My heart was full. I wanted to bottle up this feeling and keep it forever. You see, when I took care of myself, I merely existed. But when I contributed to the existence of someone else, I felt alive. My trail of failures led me to a calling in education, so I thought, well, that's it. All I have to do is become a teacher, and all of my problems will be solved. I realized that if I didn't fail so many times in life, I wouldn't have found my calling because it wasn't the failure. It was my ability to keep trying despite my fear of failure. I know so many people who wouldn't get back on the bike because someone saw them fall and they're afraid of being laughed at. I know just as many people that had plans and prematurely told someone and it didn't go as planned, so they stopped because they were afraid they'd get judged. I know some of the most talented people who blame laziness, but in reality, they're just afraid of trying because people may see their weakness. I know brilliant minds who are afraid of hearing the word no, so they don't try at all. I challenge everyone in here to consider how your failures have contributed to where you are today. Do you talk about them or do you hide them? There isn't a person in here who hasn't failed at something. And while those moments may have been difficult, they were all purposeful. If in your life no one has told you, or maybe someone tried to tell you, but you weren't in a space to fully receive it, allow me to. It is okay to fail. I'm currently in my 3rd year of teaching, and I couldn't imagine being anything else. Teaching is a very selfish, selfless act of service for me. I gained so much from my kids, and I found myself being the student as they teach me about life. One lesson that stands out developed from my first cohort of students in their fear of failure. I constantly tell them to stop being afraid to be great. I couldn't understand how a group of students could be so intelligent, filled with so much promise and talent, and yet still afraid to stand in their greatness. It didn't occur to me until much later that they weren't afraid to be great. They were afraid to fail. I found myself constantly telling them my favorite failure anecdote that takes me back to the 3rd grade teacher, explaining the reasons pencils have erasers on them are so that we can make mistakes. We can just simply remove them and move on. What I didn't tell them for so long is that I secretly hated that theory because we all know that even the best erasers don't remove mistakes completely. You can still see remnants of where you tried something that didn't work, but as an adult, I can appreciate the spots being left behind as a reminder of effort. If we empower one another to become human erasers, then we will understand that our failures lead us to our first draft. Remind as many people as possible that when you're writing your story, you're making mistakes, but that they are essential to your success, because without them, how can you understand who you are or where you're going without examining where you came from? Incorporating phrases like "that's okay," it's not a big deal. And let me tell you how long it took me to master that skill that you're currently struggling with. It makes people feel comfortable because we've taken the power away from failing, and they'll start to consider it a moment that they can just bounce back from. Now, I consider myself an unconventional teacher. It took me over 10 years to complete my bachelor's. The first job on my resume was reality television star, and the second was fashion model. One of my favorite listed skills on my resume is the ability to see failure as not the end, but the beginning. I hope you decide to make a commitment to share your failures, because without it, excellence does not exist. And the cool thing about failure is it'll never tell you that you're too tall, too short, or too urban. Everyone's welcome to fail. Thank you.